Welcome everyone, Christine here on Serious Gaming with my Protection Paladin Tank Guide for the Burning Crusade patch 2.4.3 with itemization pre 2.1. Something Blizzard likely wouldn't do if they ever were to release a Burning Crusade server, if Classic is successful given their decision of itemization in Classic, but something that a lot of private servers do in terms of pre 2.1, because 2.1, the release of Black Temple, changed a lot of the items in the game, buffed overall most of the epic items, in particular in tier 4 but also tier 5 as well, and this made the content easier in tier 4 and tier 5. But a lot of servers use the pre 2.1 itemization for a bigger challenge, and then ridiculously buff the bosses anyway, because hey, it's very important to have a very difficult challenge on raid bosses in a game that's been out for an expansion that was out over a decade ago. Anyway, for Paladins, main tank sounds an odd term. Well, there's a reason I go with it for this video. One of which is Paladins aren't really off tanks in a, I guess you could say, traditional way. They are ad tanks, they're good at multi-target tanking, but that doesn't make them off tanks. An off tank, from my point of view, is someone, say for instance on Trash, you need 2 or 3 tanks in a raid, but on the actual boss you only need 1 tank. Well, an off tank is someone you can bring to that boss and they will contribute something useful. Feral Druids are really good at this because they can go cat form, DPS. They won't do amazing, but they do some DPS, offer combat res, offer innervate, all that. Warriors, they can keep Thunderclap up, keep Demo Shout up, and they can intervene the main tank. Very importantly as well for druids and warriors is that they can, if they so desire, they can also work to be second on threat. So if say you have a boss where maybe the main tank might die, you can have a tank working to be second in threat, so he or she can pick up the boss in case the main tank dies. And this is a scenario that can happen, and it's a useful thing. Paladins can't do that. They can't build threat and their utility in a raid environment if they're not tanking anything is close to nil. The best you can do is judge Seal of Crusader if you have it approved, or Seal of Wisdom, or maybe Seal of Light, though I'd recommend a Holy Paladin do that, and then keep those judgment up for the duration of the fight. Though if you have a Retribution Paladin in your raid, he will keep the judgments up. You're just there to provide the initial judgment of Crusader, Light, Wisdom, and then the ret will do the job. So basically you're useless, and that's the first and most important, and one of the important points here about definition here. The most important though is this: if you're the kind of person who's gonna approach tanking, be a paladin, warrior, or druid, from the perspective, in this case paladin, oh, I'm a trash tank, I'm an ad tank for, say, Morgrim, Tidewalker, and Hydral Trash, Felmist, assuming you get to Sunwell. If that's what you want your role to be, then you might as well be playing Holy or Retribution with a Protospic set that you take care of, enchanted, all that you switch to and respec when you get to those bosses that require it, or maybe the trash and raids that require it, because that's how useful you are. If on the other hand, you want to offer your raid something very useful, you should view your role from a main tank point of view. Not in the sense that a good tank is someone who can push the raid forward, who can seize the initiative, who can act in a way as a quasi-raid leader, not really as a raid leader, but someone who can help push the raid along, can push how trash pulls are handled, how bosses are handled. A good tank is someone who is there to help the raid leader get things along. Very importantly as well, though, is that you also should work with the other tanks you have, warriors, druids, as a team. It's very important that you work as a team. It's very important to understand your limits, what you can offer, what you can't do, what you're good at, and work together within a team. Because there are many mediocre tanks in World of Warcraft, and there are few good tanks. And since many guilds don't want more than one Protection Paladin during the Burning Crusade, if you're gonna do that for a guild, then you want to be someone that's not just dependable, oh I show up for raids, but someone who can help push things along. This will greatly help your guild get things done in general, and will when trash, if you have tanks that know what the hell they're doing, that communicate well with each other, that work as a cohesive team, they can really speed up trash clearing raids, and even on bosses they will help a great deal. And it's important to understand that and adopt that kind of mentality. Be a team, work together, have initiative, seize the day, all that. I'd say there's a certain level of arrogance required, but also a certain level of team play required in order to get it done. I mean, you don't have to like your other tanks, but you should be able to put whatever differences you might have aside and work together as a team. And that's the most important aspect here, by far away, more so than anything else. Your mentality as a player, how vocal you are, how much can you offer your raid than just, oh, I'm gonna come here, press my buttons, tank what I'm told to tank, do what I'm told, being spoon-fed by the raid leader, by the people in charge. So speak up, but also be a team player. Now, as for what a paladin can offer beyond AoE threat, obviously, well, here are some comparisons, namely against warrior. Druid is in a very weird position as a tank, because beyond the fact that they can go cat and DPS, they have more armor, more HP, more dodge, but they also take crushing blows in tier 4, tier 5, tier 6 until Sunwell Plateau. So in many ways, they have some problems. They have advantages, disadvantages, but tanks that consistently take crushing blows are something plenty of people hate. Then you get in Sunwell Plateau, and druids are the kings of Sunwell Plateau. They're the best tanks in the game by far, be it Caligos, Brutalis, Felmist, Twins, Moru, Kil'jaeden. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of guilds on retail used feral druids as main tanks during Sunwell Plateau. That's not to say warriors and paladins can't tank. Quite a few have. We're just talking on what's really powerful, overpowered in some ways. And that's when we entered the age of the druid main tank after Sunwell Plateau. But anyway, for a paladin versus a warrior. Now, on paper, if you look at talents, abilities, a paladin will take 6% reduced damage because of improved Righteous Fury. A warrior will take 10% reduced damage due to defensive stance on physical attacks. But it's a bit more complicated than that. You can't just say, oh, a paladin takes 4% more physical damage. It might sound like that on paper, but again, more complicated. You can have you can have more HP than even Tauren warriors, depending on your gearing. Though a warrior will generally have more avoidance than you and more block value than you. But parry haste is a thing in Burning Crusade, and the only attacks that you have as a paladin that can be parried are literally your auto swings, which generate the least amount of threat anyway. So you can get to a boss, oh, this boss hits really hard, really fast, and if I get a parry haste on this boss, I'll probably end up dead. And that's something you can stop attacking with your auto swings and take significantly reduced damage, but while still generating a lot of threat, because much of your threat is generated either through consecration or through getting hit via Holy Shield or through judging, none of which are abilities that require you to hit your target in a melee swing. Difference between paladins and warrior, and a significant advantage for paladin tanks on those kind of encounters, not having to deal with parry haste. A particular example early on in the game, Prince Malchezaar. He can do crushing blows, he has a fast attack speed in phase 2 where he deals a lot of damage, and he can really destroy tanks if you get a parry haste, so you ought to be careful there. And that's one particular example. On top of that, both paladins and warriors can avoid crushing blows completely. Warriors with shield block, paladins with holy shield. The way it works with regards to crushing blows, and there's a great add-on called Tankadin that can help you figure this out, but the way it works with crushing blows, you avoid crushing blows by having a hit being missed, dodged, parried, or blocked. Now, the overall math behind this is you need 102.4% avoidance plus block. So miss, dodge, parry plus block, chance, not value, block chance, and you will not take crushing blows. Now, Holy Shield by default gives you 30%. For warriors, it's 75%. You have double the charges effectively, given cooldown of shield block versus Holy Shield. You have double the charges with Holy Shield. What this means is, realistically, it's harder for a paladin to get to crush cap, but once you do have it, warriors having it by default, once you do have it, it's easier to keep it on. There are many fights in the game, quite a few encounters, Prince Malkazar, Eladin Stormrage, hell, Morgrim Tidewalker, where the shield block charges of a warrior can and will be consumed because of various attacks, because of attack speed of bosses, whereas your Holy Shield charges likely never will. It's actually kind of ironic when you think about the idea of Morgrim Tidewalker, the boss where a lot of people bring Paladin Tanks to deal with ads, that it's actually the kind of fight where a Paladin could really do a good job at tanking the boss himself because of the way the mechanics of said boss work. It's quite a realization that I had playing on this server in particular, getting to Morgrim Tidewalker, having tanks die literally because of shield block charges being consumed on that particular fight. It just is it's just that kind of example. Fairly rare, of course, but it is a point worth understanding. And if you're tanking a lot of mobs, similarly, if you're tanking a lot of mobs, you will on average, assuming all debuffs and buffs, you will on average take less damage than any other tank in the game, because you have Holy Shield and it has 8 charges, so you can block more attacks than a warrior can, and obviously a druid can't block, so yes, that's something we're considering. Beyond the threat advantage, it's also a survivability advantage. So it's a bit complicated, and I'd say overall, what it really ends up being in terms of survival between warriors and paladins is that it's roughly the same when you add it all up together, but then you have cooldowns to consider, then you have Demo Shout, Thunderclap to consider, and those are worth considering in a smaller raiding environment or in a 5-man environment, not so much in a 25-man raiding environment. Demo Shout is a big deal, because a lot of attacks that mobs do are tied to their attack power. So if you can reduce their attack power via Demo Shout, Curse of Weakness, the Screech of Hunter Owls, which is certainly worth using because it can be done in an AoE as opposed to Curse of Weakness, and it can stack, obviously, until you reduce the attack power of a mob or boss to 0. Demo Shot can reduce damage, not so much on the physical part, not so much on the white attacks that mobs do, but on their special attacks. That's where the damage reduction from Demo Shot is significant. Obviously, Thunderclap, reducing attack speed, also fairly significant in its own right, and you don't have those. It's worth bearing in mind that without those, you can and will take significantly more damage. Someone else can apply them, and likely will in a 25-man raiding environment. But in a 10-man raiding environment and a 5-man raiding environment, it's a bit more complicated. You can rely on warlocks, DPS warriors to do so, feral druids, for instance, if they're off-tanking, and obviously other warriors to do it. Other warrior tanks to do it as well. In terms of threat, warriors and druids have... the way it works is fairly different to warriors and druids. I mean, they have more bursty threat. They do abilities like, Shield Slam. Lots of threat there, can do quite a lot of threat. But warrior threat is very reliant in many ways on stats. On multiple stats. Be it block value, hit, expertise, strength, all that. Haste even. When you add all of those together. For you as a paladin, your advantage is... you are only really reliant for threat on one stat and one stat alone, and that's spell damage, bonus damage from spells. That's really the only thing that matters for you as a paladin tank. You just care about spell damage, that's what improves your threat. I don't know the exact calculation how much one spell damage is worth, but suffice to say that you will not have a very huge amount of it. But even say like something like 20, let alone 100 in certain cases in particular weapons, can add quite a bit of threat. You're not as reliant on hit or expertise as a warrior is, and in fact you have a certain innate advantage because of certain mandatory talents that you have to take, or one mandatory talent you have to take. Your threat is less bursty. You do have Avenger Shield and you do have Judgment as abilities for threat, but it's less bursty. It's more reliant on Consecration, more reliant on reflective damage from Holy Shield, greater Blessing of Sanctuary, and Retribution Aura. And while warriors can certainly use Retribution Aura and Sanctuary themselves, they don't benefit from them as much as a Paladin because they're holy damage, and you as a Paladin tank via Righteous Fury get close to double the threat from any bit of holy damage that you do. Worth understanding, Paladin threat is based more so on low damage, but that's multiplied because of Righteous Fury. It's a lot of threat thanks to Righteous Fury, improved Righteous Fury in particular. So very important to understand that. Overall, depending on rate, your threat will obviously depend a lot on gear, rate comp, and all that, but in an ideal situation, there isn't a huge amount of difference, but the ability of a warrior to burst versus the more sustained threat of a paladin via consecration in particular is a difference worth considering, and it can affect the way you approach certain encounters. In particular, like encounters where you need snappy threat, where you just need, threat and demand on a particular moment, you're less effective on those encounters than a warrior or druid. There's also, threat-wise, it's important to remember that there is a great perception, and a false one, that paladins are bad tanks on bosses like Void Reaver or Gurtak Bloodboil. Those two encounters in particular, those are encounters where, and some of this can apply to Gruul as well, if you want to have some safety valve in case the main tank dies, but Void Reaver and Gurtak Bloodboil are bosses where you need tank switches, where you will be forced to have multiple tanks on the fight, 4 tanks in the case of Void Reaver, you can go 4 tanks, no problem on Void Reaver, 3 tanks for Gurtak Bloodboil, you go 4 tanks depending on the encounter, and you need to have one guy picking up the boss at the start, but that person will eventually lose aggro on the boss because of how the mechanics work, and then someone else has to pick it up. Someone else needs to ride the main tank's threat and be able to pick up the boss to overtake the main tank in terms of threat. Now, because so much paladin threat is from reflective damage, and because the way our resources work, our mana work, requires us to get hit and then healed, with us gaining 10% of the healing gets transformed into mana. So, you get healed for 6k, you gain 600 mana. Because of that, and because of the fact we're not really going to stack a lot of intellect, and our abilities like Consecration 616 mana out of a mana pool right here of about close to 6k, obviously it's a bit higher in a raid, then you can have some problems there if you are not the tank that starts first. That's all a paladin needs to do on those encounters, on Void Reaver and Gurtak Bloodboil, and he or she will do just fine. You go in there, you pull them first, or hey, if you want to tank Gruul, you can't be an off tank on Gruul, you can't generate the threat, but you can main tank Gruul just fine, and have one guy taking the Hatefuls and a third guy, because you will want 3 tanks anyway for High King Mulgar, a third guy building threat just to be as a safety valve in case of a worst case scenario. And that's how you can do it. It works very well. I've done this on the server, I've done it on retail numerous times. Though I think the server is a better example because the way DPS works on a lot of private servers, DPSers are doing significantly more damage, significantly more threat than they ever were on retail, Warlocks in particular. So the fact that I tanked Void Reaver just fine, and what I mean by that, you don't just, I'm gonna tank Void Reaver, I only pull the boss, then once I lose aggro I'll never gain it back. No. You pull the boss, you do a lot of aggro at the start, you will lose it, someone else picks it up, and then eventually you'll pick it up yourself. You're gearing here your group composition. If you have a Retribution Paladin, that's a significant bonus because it's 10%, 12% really extra threat, but 10% threat that you benefit from exclusively because of Sanctiaura, That's a big bonus for Fret in your raid, or you're using Spell Power Flask, etc. Certain things that you need to consider when it comes to dealing with those bosses. I'll talk about gear in a moment. But that's the idea behind Fret. You can generate Fret just fine. You can compete with warriors depending on the gearing group, all that. You can compete with warriors, with druids just fine. And obviously it's important to be able to do so given the very high Fret your DPSers will be generating in raids. There are certainly certain counters where you'll do less better than others. In terms of Fret, Paladins do very well on demons or undead. There's a lot of bosses that are like that. And on demons or undead that are dual wielders, you can probably generate some of the highest Fret per second of any tank in the game. This comes down to your exorcism ability. You can only use it on demons or undead. And it can generate a lot of Fret, and obviously Holy Shield is more beneficial on fast-hitting bosses. You know where this applies? Illidan Stormrage as a particular example. But I'm not going to talk too much about specific bosses. Suffice to say, dual wielders, you have an advantage in both Fret and an extent survivability, but you also have an advantage on demons and undead in terms of Fret. Combine those two, you are at the top of the food chain in terms of buff. But of course, many people will talk about, oh, Paladin can't tank Illidan because of Shear. No, Shear works in, I guess you could say, in the same way as a crushing blow. If you can avoid crushing blows on a boss, you can avoid Illidan's Shear. And because of the fact he's a dual wielder, he's a fast attacker, a warrior has to time his blocks, a shield block, whereas a Paladin just pops Holy Shield, keeps it up, and avoids it completely while doing very significant amount of friend, no problemo. I might talk at one point about Illidan in particular in greater detail, but a fact to consider here is if you have a free tank raid setup, Warrior, Druid, Paladin, basic one, default one, it's very good if a warrior is intervening whoever is main tanking. That can reduce damage by a lot. Instead of, oh, I'll have that warrior tank because that's the default position of many guilds. That's just my personal view on the matter. Now, let's talk about talents. How you should use the talents, the talent tree. I'll link my build in the description. I'll explain it just a moment. Many of these talents are mandatory, so Redoubt, Shield Specialization, Arm Toughness, Improve Righteous Fury, a lot of mandatory talents. Now, some people can choose not to go in Blessing of Kings. Let's talk about optional talents. Most of the stuff here is mandatory, so be it Sacred Duty, Holy Shield, Avenger Shield, Combat Expertise, One-Handed Weapon Specialization, you will always take these talent points, so there's really not much point talking about them. You can choose to not take Blessing of Kings, but it does give you more flexibility if you have it in a raid than just relying on your holies or your rets to do it and the way you handle blessings. But if you want an extra point, you can certainly drop it. Precision, although you're not as dependent on hit as other tanks are, it's not just melee hit, it's also spell hit. So your Judgment, your Avenger Shield, your Exorcism is going to be affected by it. 3% hit, very, very useful. And then as part of your mandatory talent pack, you will have Combat Expertise for the 10% stamina, but you get 5 expertise points. Very useful to have it. So by default, you have 3% hit and 5 expertise for your talents. That's a fairly significant advantage that you have there. Now, the one choice that I made here in terms of my talents that many people will likely disagree with is I got Reckoning. Reckoning is not a great talent in terms of Fret. It's just a bit, and it really only affects your melee swings with Seal of the Righteous for a bit of extra Fret. Is a slight Fret bonus. Why pick it instead of Ardent Defender, you might ask? Ardent Defender being a default talent for many people. The answer to that comes in two ways. One, the server that I'm playing on, the Netherwing server, is buffed to the extreme. bosses here, take for instance Lady Vosh. Lady Vosh here on the server hits for about 8 to 9k on a tier 5 gear tank. On retail, she hit for about 4k on a tier 4 gear tank. I would know, I have the data, I tanked her on retail, I've tanked her here I've tanked her here in phase 1. Phase 3 being a different beast altogether for a number of reasons. But anyway, point being, she does a lot more damage and everything else does a lot more damage. And the way Ardent Defender works as a talent is the damage reduction will only kick in once you're below 35%. Until that point, you'll take damage as regularly, but only once you drop there. And if a hit hits you after that point, will that hit get the damage reduction. That is extremely situational, and given the HP I have at the moment, also given the damage on the server, it will likely leapfrog. That's the term we used back on retail when it came to Ardent Defender. So you can avoid taking Ardent Defender. If you find this, the situations where you'd use it are very limited. I prefer having the extra bit of threat from Reckoning as opposed to Ardent Defender. Another option here is, okay, and these talents, Benediction, obviously parry, you need that, and Improved Judgment, default talents. You can take those 5 points and you can go Pursuit of Justice, and maybe even go all the way down in Crusade. That actually might be more beneficial. I haven't tested that out, I might, but it certainly could be worth consideration. Going for Crusade as opposed to Reckoning might actually work out better. But Reckoning can stack up very nicely as well with a certain tier bonus from tier 4, it's not a lot, but it can provide a small benefit. The way I feel about Paladin Threat here in relation to talents, you gain a lot as default, and you will not gain a lot from gearing unless you go fully ham on it when it comes to spell damage, unless you really sacrifice a lot of survivability for it. And it is far better in terms of your talent builds, obviously, in terms of your gear builds and all that, to focus first and foremost on your survivability, then your threat. That's your first priority, survivability, then threat. Anyway, rotation. There isn't really a rotation per se, it's more of a priority list. Consecration, you want to keep it up all the time, unless you have mana issues. Then beyond that, you want to keep a judgment up by the Crusader. Seal of Crusader can give you a hefty threat bonus on its judgment of Crusader. But if you have another Paladin providing it, a Retribution Paladin, who can more easily get the 3% crit, should get the 3% crit. If basically you're alone as a Paladin in a raid, you should get Improved Seal of Crusader for 25 man raiding in particular. And you should judge Crusader. But if you have a Retribution Paladin, it's an ideal raid setup to have a Retribution Paladin, then you should judge Wisdom and keep that up. Keep that judgment up on the boss. You just need to judge it once. Consecration, keeping up Holy Shield. On undead and demon targets, you do Exorcism on cooldown. It's a very useful spell. It can do a lot of threat. And sometimes you might be able to use Avenger Shield. Use it at your own risk. It's not ideal in every circumstance, and it obviously does open you to taking a lot of damage, because when you cast something, you can't avoid attacks. So just keep in mind that you should use Avenger Shield. Your pull should be Avenging Wrath, Avenger Shield on a target, Judging, Exorcism if necessary. Obviously you want to keep Holy, and then Holy Shield, then Judging, Crusade, or Wisdom, and then going back to your priority list. Keeping Consecration up, Judging on cooldown, keeping Seal up, Exorcism, Holy Shield. That's how your quote-unquote rotation, it isn't much, should be handled. I'd say for a tank it's more important that they have raid awareness than they have a good rotation. It doesn't matter that you get a perfect rotation unless threat is a really big issue for you. Then yes, you should focus on it, but most of the time it's more important that you're aware what's going on in your raid, you're aware where people are standing, you're aware of what's going on and how you should handle it. Gearing priorities, you should focus on the following stats in this order. Avoidance plus block to get to 102.4% for crush immunity, 490 defense for crit immunity. Those two are very important. 490 defense obviously is the most important, then crush cap in that order. So 490 defense, crush cap, and then as much stamina, armor, and spell power as you can get. Dependent on what you're looking for, you can lose some avoidance, you can lose some stamina in favor of more spell damage if you require more threat. Preferably, you generally want to keep your crush cap, and regardless of what gear you're using, and obviously you want to keep your 490 defense. Now, Tank then helps me with this. Holy Shield adds 30% with a Libram. It's a bit more than that. It's like over 5% with a certain Libram in the game. So you will need to make up for the difference on your own. But those are your gearing priorities. 490 defense, crush cap, so avoidance plus block, stamina, armor, spell damage. For threat, you sacrifice preferably stamina and armor for the sake of spell damage. Now I'll go into specific gearing. This is my default survival, though I can switch some piece around the gloves. The tier 5 gloves here, I can switch them with the maiden ones, and I'll do so here. And I'll go over specific pieces. I'll also talk about enchants, all of that, and professions at the end of it. Helm, tier 4 helm, best in slot in the game until tier 6 overall. You can use the engineering helm once that gets added in the game, but you do sacrifice threat for it. Whereas the Justicar face guard, because of defense and dodge, spell power is very good. It's not as good in terms of stamina as the tier 5 one, but because of the dodge and the way itemization works post 2.1, it's in my opinion the best helm in the game. Tier 5 is a viable option if you want to go for it, but keep in mind this. You don't want to be a greedy cunt with regards to this. You have to understand that even if you kill Lady Vashj and get the tier 5 helm, there aren't going to be many of those walking around, right? You can argue that you get tier 4 first, tier 4 helm in particular, but you shouldn't be a greedy cunt with tier 5 pieces, in particular the pieces from Lady Vashj, Kael'thas. And I'll get into the chest in a moment. Alternative, when you're gearing up, when you're working for your pre-raid BIS, I've provided a link in the description of this video with a list from the Felma server of pre-raid BIS. Don't follow that, don't look at that list, like the item at the top is the item I want to go for. No, use your brain there. From my personal point of view, the best helm outside of raiding is the Felsteel helm. You can also get the Opera helm from Karazhan if you don't get tier 4 one. The tier 4 helm is the best one. Outside of that, Felsteel helm, lots of armor, free sockets, very useful, very good to use. And you have a revered helm enchant, which you should get. And in this case, I've also gone for the socket bonus, though I should probably change this during Talasite. I put it in when I was struggling a bit on defense. I should probably switch it for a Regal Night's Eye. Generally, you want stamina gems unless you need a bit of avoidance from socket bonus or a bit of defense. You're going to struggle a lot early on with defense and avoidance, just worth keeping in mind. Neck. This is the maiden neck. Best in slot until Kael'thas quest neck, which isn't until 2.1 comes out. But yeah, best in slot until basically end of tier 5 or tier 6. Alternatives are the Cenarion Expedition Revered neck. And that one is actually better in terms of defense, which can be useful. Hell, when I originally got this, because of the defense it has, I struggled a bit with the loss of defense versus the Cenarion neck. Shoulders, tier 4 shoulders, very obviously hiking Malgar is a fairly easy boss to do. I have the tier 5 shoulders here because I can afford to lose the block rating, but the tier 4 ones have block rating, offer spell damage, and are really, once 2.1 hits, in some ways better than tier 5. Tier 5 are, in a sense, luxury items that you get if you have a lot of good gear otherwise. They are slightly better than tier 4, but only if you can afford the loss of the block rating. Pre-raid Bis, there's only really one alternative, which is the Fan Blade Pauldrons. These drop from Akanai Crypts, Heroic, First Boss. Do it until you get them. They are really the best shoulders in the game pre-raid. Alternative, you can get Spaulders of the Bold when you're initially leveling. Once you've initially leveled up, once you're looking for some shoulders, you can get Shoulders of the Bold. And you can also get for Fret, if you just want, or for 5-mans in particular, you can get Spaulders of the Righteous, the Paladin dungeon set, effectively. With Helm, also Helm of the Righteous, you can also get those. That for the 2-set bonus of that set is very good. Cloak, Devil Shark Cape, best cloak in game. Steam Vault's normal. You will not replace this until either Alar drops its cloak, or you get into tier 6 in Mount Hyjal and you get the trash cloak. So very good cloak, the only real option. Chest, from pre-raid Bis, Mechanar, Fire Mage Boss drops a chest with high defense, high block rating. You get that chest, that's the best chest pre-raid. I see so many paladins running around with chests that have no block rating or dodge or anything, and it just is stupid. You want to get Crush Cap. It's your first priority. The chest from Mechanar really helps you with that, as opposed to the chest guard of the Righteous or any other nonsense. This is the Nightbane chest. In terms of pure survival, it's the best chest in the game. Pre 2.1, post 2.1. Whatever you do chest-wise, and if you ever find yourself in a luxurious position where you can even get it, but whatever you do, don't be a cunt to take the tier 5 chest. It's worse. It's worse because it only has defense. It has no block rating, it has no avoidance. And if you want a spell damage chest, well, you get the tier 4 chest from Macfaradin. You wait for 2.1, and it's about the same as the Panzerfraun breastplate, which I have here. It just has slightly lower defense, block rating, and doesn't have block value, but you gain spell damage. That's one I'd go for once 2.1 hits, so I can get tier 4 set bonus, the 2 set bonus, and to generate a bit of extra fret. And that's obviously a sacrifice in terms of survivability for the sake of fret. Not a big one, but a smart one, as opposed to getting tier 5 chest, which is just being a cunt, really. Many people want the tier 5 chest. Many paladins, rogues, shamans want it. Don't be an asshole to get it when it's arguably the least useful tier item from tier 5 for you. The helm is viable, the chest from tier 5 is not. And I'd say in this video that one of the motivations I had in making this video was seeing so many Paladin tanks gearing up so badly on this server, on other servers. Bracers. Outside the Void Reaver ones, which only appear on servers once 2.1 hits or if they have 2.1 itemization, your only real option are Bracers of the Green Fortress. Not too expensive to get them, there are some blue ones, but there's only one real option. The crafted Bracers of the Green Fortress, defense and dodge. Put stamina on them, and I actually should go back and talk about some enchants here. On chest, 150 health enchant, on cloak, armor enchant, on shoulders, Alder Scryer's Exalted. Stamina gems, as you can see over there. You use stamina gems unless you need to use defense gems or avoidance gems in order to reach crush cap or defense cap. Now, gloves. There aren't many good options for gloves outside of raids. Hell, there aren't many good options for gloves until you reach tier 5 for you. For warriors, there are many, because warriors don't need to worry as much as we do about crush cap. They have it inherently, right? But you do, so you need block rating. I have the Maiden gloves. They are, in terms of pure survival, the best gauntlets in the game, and except the Kale Foss ones. If you want an alternative, tier 5, pretty good. Defense, block rating, damage and healing, block value on that. But you don't have those 2 sockets, so you'll have less HP. Put 20 spell damage on them. Very good. Either of these work. You have that choice. you gain more armor from tier 5 than from gauntlets of the maiden, but you lose those 2 gem slots, so that's a sacrifice worth considering, you know, armor versus gems, so effectively stamina, and having those gem slots versus the spell power. Now, personally, the damage and healing more from tier 5, so I generally use those. Belt. If you're struggling with crush cap, you want a belt with defense and block rating. This is the Morose belt. Can be fairly easy to acquire, but Karazhan drops can be fairly a fairly big nuisance as well. There are 2 belts, I think, pre-raid. There's one from Slave Pen's Heroic and another one from a quest. I'd recommend the Slave Pen's Heroic one because it has 2 sockets. Very good belt. And once you get it, Morose one, by far and away the best belt. There is one in tier 5 from Leofrost the Blind, and once 2.1 hits, there's even some crafted one. I'd recommend arguing in your guild. You know, if you're tanking Karazhan with a warrior, which is ideal in many ways, you should argue that you should take the block rating gear yourself as a priority. So, or the gear that has more avoidance for yourself, while warriors can get block value hit expertise gear over you. And it's just probably a good way of doing business. So for instance, bracers, there's some that drop from the first boss in Karazhan that should go to warrior, for instance. The chest here, well, the chest that warriors have from tier 4 from McFerrin is better, or about on par with Panzerfran. It's better for them to get that chest than it is for you initially before 2.1. So you should argue that, you know, Panzerfran is a big upgrade for you. A lot of items with dodge or block rating or parry are beneficial to you, whereas warriors benefit more from hit, expertise, block value than obviously you do, because it benefits them. Warriors will have inherently more avoidance than you will, and they don't have to worry about the crush cap again. Pants. The default pants you start with are the Keepers of Time revered ones, Time Warden leggings, which are similar to these ones, the Curator pants, the Rin Dynasty leggings. Now, the Rin Dynasty leggings are the best pants in the game until tier 6 in terms of pure survival, but that doesn't mean you should use them until the end of time. I personally use the tier 5 ones because I benefit from that block rating, gives me more flexibility in other slots. It's always a game, right? It's always calculation, what do I benefit from more and all that. In this case, I am struggling more and more as other people get geared in my guild. I'm struggling more and more in fret, so I'm focusing on improving my fret while also not losing as much survival as some other pieces would force me to. So in this case, I'm using the tier 5 legs, but a really good alternative when you're focused on survival, Rin Dynasty Greaves, and outside of that, Time Warden leggings. No other choices beyond that. Boots. Boot-wise, these are the chest boots. There's from Karazhan, really good until the Salarian boots or until the crafted boots get added in TK Serpentine Cavern. Alternative is the trash boots from Karazhan and pre-raid Manitoum's normal escort quest. Normal, not heroic, but normal escort quest. Rings, and on boots, obviously on legs, you put the stamina enchantment with agility. On boots, I don't have Pursuit of Justice, so I went with minor speed and stamina, but you can go 12 stamina if you choose to go for Pursuit of Justice. Rings, I'll talk about professions in just a moment. But rings, your pre-grade alternatives are this one, which is from Arcatraz Normal, Final Boss, Defense and Dodge, very good. The one I'm using here is from Morgrim Tidewalker, Defense and Dodge, more stamina, less defense over there. The second ring, the Violet Signet of the Great Protector, the Exalted Ring from Karazhan. When you're working for your pre-raid Bisto, the best ring you can get is this one, Dormu's tier. It has a lot of defense, it has a lot of dodge, it has a lot of shield block rating. It doesn't have stamina or armor or anything like that, But this amount of avoidance plus block will greatly help you when you're building your initial gear for pre-raid. Trinkets, and actually going back to the rings, I have enchanting. It's the best profession you should go for, and I have 12 spell power on both rings. Considering the fact that I have 300 spell damage overall, having 12 spell damage on rings is a big benefit, and you should certainly get enchanting. Second profession is engineering. These two trinkets, the goblin rocket launchers, are the best stamina trinkets in the game, bar none, and you should get them initially. They're very expensive, but you should get them until, I don't know, tier 6. You'll replace them then in you will have alternatives once Black Temple comes out, either 2.1 itemization, or Dark Moon Fair, or Serpentine Caverns Trash Trinket, or BT Trinket. But until then, these two are really good for survival. In terms of initial gearing, opening my inventory, in terms of initial gearing, there are 3 trinkets in the game with defense rating on them if you need the crit immunity cap. And these are Adamantite figurine, best one, drops from second boss in Shadow Labs normal. There's the Hellfire Peninsula quest, which has less defense, but you can get it while leveling, while being 61, 62, very easy to get for a quest. And then the third one you get from a quest from Netherstorm. I'd say that's the least useful one, and you might want to look at some other rewards from that particular quest, the Demencius Old Devourer quest. Once you have crit cap, you should work on getting figurine of the Colossus. This block rating one, 32 block rating, is very good for 2 things. 1, this amount of block rating will really help you get crush cap, and 2, this trinket is phenomenal when you are trying to AoE farm. Not AoE tank, AoE farm. You can generate about 100 to 300 gold an hour with reasonable gear at the Black Temple terrace. The Demon Hunters and the Paladin mobs with the Bloodlords, the occasional Bloodlords, you can AoE farm them. It's a popular spot, and this trinket will help you a lot with that. More importantly, initially it will help you get a lot. It will help you get the initial avoidance needed. Alternative from raiding are Morrow's Lucky Pocket Watch, very useful to have, and the Hydrus Scarab of Displacement for the extra bit of defense rating. Both very useful trinkets, and you should try and get them. Warriors prefer as well to get 2 Goblin Rocket Launcher or 1 Goblin Rocket Launcher, and the block value trinket from badges. Those are their choices, so you're not really, if you're in a Karazhan, you're not really asking too much to get Morose first, for instance, or you go to Hydra, so you're asking for the Scarab of Displacement first, because likely if you've killed Hydros, your tanks likely have enough defense to handle him, right? They're crit capped anyway. Libram, there's only one real option for most game, and that's Libram of Repentance, which increases your block rating by 42 while Holy Shield is active. Helps a lot. For Fret, if you just care purely about Fret, you can get the Libram of Eternal Rest. This drops from Cephalic Holes, increases the damage of your Consecration by up to 47. It's a bit of a trick, though. It makes it sound more useful than it actually is, because Consecration damage, 47 to Consecration damage. Well, my Consecration here is 512 damage over 8 seconds. So it's not really a lot in terms of fret per second. It's just a tiny bit, but it can help in terms of pure fret. Shield-wise, you can use a spell damage shield if you care for fret. I personally prefer other options. Outside of that, there is the Bad Shield. There's a quest shield from Shadow Moon Valley, one with defense and spell damage. You should get that initially. Then you get either the Bad Shield or the Shatari Exalted Shield or the Nightbane Shield, with the best shield in the game being the Eldori Legacy Defender until tier 6, the Gruul Shield, which I have right here. And in terms of weapon, the Continuum Blade from Keepers of Time Revered is the best weapon in game. It has the most amount of stamina. With a good attack speed, you want a fast weapon and good spell damage, 121 spell damage. Once 2.1 is added, then you get Ogrilla, you have the Crystal Forged Sword, which has block rating as opposed to spell hit. And a bit less intellect, but still about, the same stamina, same spell damage, and block rating, that's very good. But this is the best weapon in the game. Outside of that, if you care for Fret, there are obviously some options here, some decisions. For Cloak, there's the Karazhan Cloak, the Drape of the Righteous, which drops from Karazhan Trash, which can improve your holy damage by 40. Very useful if you can afford to use it. Tier 4 chest, once 2.1 hits. Gloves, Crystal Forged Gloves. My preference is to go for the ring and trinket route for extra spell damage if I need it with the cloak. So my Fret gear looks something along these lines. I have the Drape of the Righteous as for the extra holy spell damage. I have the Spectral Band of Enervation. Basically, a ring with as much stamina, intellect, and spell damage as you can. Go for those stats. High spell damage, high stamina, high intellect, that's your best choice. I believe this one drops from Attunement the Huntsman, if I'm not mistaken. One trinket, because with the cloak I'm using, I'm struggling. I could struggle a bit if I didn't use the defense trinket. Trinket, I'm using the Scarab for the extra defense. I could use the Adamantite, but that's obviously less useful. So Scarab of Displacement and the Alar trinket, which gives me a chance when I cast a spell, be it a heal or any spell, to get 300 spell damage. It procs quite a bit. Alternative outside that, when you're gearing up initially, is any trinket with spell damage. There's a green one from a quest that gives about 20 by default and an unused effect of extra. But the badge one is Icon of the Silver Crescent, and this is the one I've had for a lot. 42 damage and healing with an unused effect of 155 for 20 seconds. This can be very, very useful, in particular when, say for instance, you're tanking on Morgrim and you've had some issues when the Morlock spawned. You pop that, you pop wings potentially, and you can hold aggro just fine. This is the kind of gear that will generate you a lot of Fret. You want spell damage on sword, of course, on weapon. Alternatives for weapons, if you care about pure Fret, one of the items you shouldn't go for, certainly if I'm looking here at Atlas loot, one of the items that I see quite a few people using and that you should never go for as a Paladin tank is the Lower City Exalted Maze, the Gavel of Unearthed Secrets. It has reasonable stamina, reasonable intellect, and 150 spell damage, but its attack speed is bad. 2.7 attack speed. This will affect you. I haven't done the exact calculation, but I'm pretty sure the Gavel of Unearthed Secrets would do less Fret overall because of its attack speed, purely on attack speed level to a single target, than Continuum Blade. For AoE, yes, obviously, that extra spell damage would benefit you on Consecration in particular, because the way Consecration scales, which is close to 1-to-1, I think it's 0.9 something when it comes to Consecration spell damage, so that 30 spell damage can be worth quite a bit. But it's not worth it. If you want a good Fret weapon that doesn't drop from raids, there is one, and it's a bit more difficult to acquire, but it is better. And that's Stormcaller. Frowlar Exalted, attack speed 1.8, has less stamina, but has the same spell damage. If you're willing to sacrifice some survivability for extra Fret, get Stormcaller. For my money, with all the people I've been dealing with all the Fret whores, with all the issues in aggro and all that, I haven't felt the need to do it. Because I don't think 30 spell damage is worth sacrificing the close to 20 stamina, and I don't think the Gavel is worth the sacrifice. Your other option is the Gladiator's Gavel, the Season 1 spell damage weapon, which isn't in the game here with pre 2.1 itemization. which isn't in the game here, but it's really by far and away the best tanking weapon in the game, but you have to do arena for it, and you have to get quite a high rating for it, so that can be annoying. And you have to wait for 2.1 as well, if your server is doing what this server is doing in terms of itemization and adding items when they were added in on retail. In terms of raid drops, there is really one option, and only one option until you get to tier 6. When you get to tier 6, there's a montage lollipop mace. But in terms of tier 5 raid drops, this baby is your only really viable option as an upgrade. And it's once 2.1 itemization is implemented on this server, it will be the best one in the game. I haven't seen a drop yet, but if you're a Paladin tank, you're gonna make a lot of enemies among the caster population, because this sword, which is the best in slot for everyone, be a mage or warlock, it's also the best in slot tanking weapon for you. You might ask why. Well, the argument here is you gain over 60 spell damage, which gets transformed into 100 versus Continuum Blade with the next patch. So you gain a bonus of 100 spell damage next patch, which would be about a third, close to a third or a quarter of my total spell damage, even in threat gear. You gain that 100 or 60 spell damage. And with 2.1 itemization, although you lose some stamina here with pre 2.1, the next patch sees an upgrade to its stamina. It won't have 30 stamina, it will have 28 stamina, I believe, and over 200 spell damage. It's the best weapon in the game that you can get, but good luck with that, with getting it. It's an argument worth having. Versus warriors, I'd say in terms of gearing, I'd say the following thing. You want to argue for block rating and avoidance offset pieces for yourself versus warriors, and leave them to have block value, hit, and expertise items for themselves for obvious reasons. In terms of a weapon, you want to argue that although it would be nice for a caster to have a Fang of the Leviathan, you boosting your threat, especially since with 2.1 their threat becomes a real issue for a lot of tanks, you boosting your threat by a significant amount without having to sacrifice a significant amount of avoidance or stamina or armor for it is a really big bonus. But that's an argument obviously for anyone in any guild. I've seen a number of paladins with Fang of Leviathan on the server, and this is where I go back to my earlier point. If you want a weapon like that, if you want to be useful, you will need a weapon like that. But if you want a weapon like that, you're going to need to prove yourself to be reliable for your guild. That's how it works. If you want to be a good tank, you need to be someone who's reliable. You need to be someone who communicates. You need to be a team player. You need to be the person on point who shows up every raid ready to go, fully flasked up. You need to be someone that your raid leader or guild leader or your officers aren't worried about whether or not that person will do their jobs. That's the key point for any tank in World of Warcraft. And if you're willing to do that, congrats, your guild has gained a dependable player, and you've joined the ranks of people that actually do their jobs well as tanks. If you're not, well, I stand by my earlier point. If all you see your tanking job as being is to, I'll be useful in terms of tanking trash, in Mount Hyjal in particular, but also in other raid instances, tanking adds on Morgrim, and eventually Felmist, then you might as well play Holy or Ret and just build an off-spec for those bosses in particular, because you're not as useful as you could be. Costin here on Serious Gaming signing out. Thank you all for watching, stay tuned for more, and hope you all enjoyed this.